Hey everybody, it's Brent Central Arkansas. Today I'm going to show you how to make a simple pepper cross. What we're going to do is we're going to cross one open pollinated pepper with another open pollinated pepper to make a hybrid or a blend of the two. This pepper here is actually just that. It is my California Bryan, which is out open pollinated, crossed with the one right next to it, which is lipstick. And I'm going to use those very same plants to show you how to do it, and how I did it actually. This particular string is something I identify that it's a crossed pepper, and that way I know that when I save the seed from that pepper, it'll be a cross of the two. Now, if I was going to cross a lot of different kinds of peppers together, I would put a little label on my string. I use just a little piece of tape and I write on the tape. So when it comes to crossing peppers, you need to select the plant that's going to be the bearer of the fruit, or the female plant, the one with the flower that's going to be pollinated. And then you need to select the donor plant, which is going to give the pollen, which in this case is lipstick, give the pollen to you to bring over to the other plant to pollinate that flower with. So peppers, like tomatoes and eggplants, are perfect flowers. They have the male and the female part all in the same flower. The little tube that sticks out, that's the female part. It has a sticky part on the end, and that's the one that receives pollen. Now if you look around the baby fruit there on this particular flower, you'll see little bitty tubes, or I guess that's the best way to call it, is a little tube. But you'll see that there's little bitty pieces here that surround it kind of in a circle, and those carry pollen. That's the male part. So when a bee, when the flower is completely open, a bee or another pollinator know to come to the flower, and they buzz it and they accept the pollen. They want the pollen, but it also helps the plant by dusting the female end of the flower. There are some plants that have a male flower. It's on a different, it's a completely different flower than a female flower, and I also do those. Particular easy one is a squash. Squash has two different types of flowers. But tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants are all perfect flowers, and they all are pollinated or cross-pollinated and cross-pollinated the same way. So we know that the flower is fully open. It's too late. That means that a pollinator is likely come to it and buzzed the pollen out. And it is probably pollinated the end of the female part, and that makes it useless for cross-pollinated, because once it accepts the pollen from wherever it gets it, it kind of closes off and it sends a signal to start growing the baby fruit, in this case a pepper. So we need to get a flower that's developed enough that it's about to open, and that is when we take the male parts off. In other words, we remove the pollen that could fertilize it, and then we man-made pull pollen from another location and use that instead. Here is a flower that is too immature. This is going to be 3 or 4 more days before it opens up. Here's another one that's even further behind than that. And another one that's even further behind that. This flower bud right here is perfect. You can tell by looking at it closely, it's got kind of wrinkles, and they're puffing and they're getting ready to split and open. That will open either tomorrow or definitely the day after. And because of that, we know that when it's open, the flower is ready to accept pollen and start growing a baby fruit. So we want to pollinate for a couple days straight to make sure that we get that fruit pollinated. Most of the time you open it and pollinate it is good enough, but if you want to make sure that you get it, you do it for 2 days in a row. So I've got my camera on a tripod here. I'm going to try to do this in front of you, reaching over my camera. I've got a pair of tweezers, sanitized of course, and they've got all those dark green color on it because of all my pollination and emasculation. And emasculation is what we're about to do. That means we're going to take the male parts off. It's kind of funny. So we're going to remove the male parts, we're going to emasculate the flower. And we're going to use these basic tweezers to do it. I'm going to try to take you in really close and show you that now. The first thing is I angle my tweezers like so, where the point isn't going to gouge the flower, but I'm going to take the edge here and I'm going to remove the petals. And when you do it, you can twist the flower a little bit in either direction, but if you do it too much, you could remove the flower itself. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the petals. And I'm also trying to keep an eye out to make sure that it's in the camera's view for you. It's taking me a little bit longer to do. Okay, there you go. Thank you, 130 Air Force. Go Air Force. That's what that is. Alright, now these little pollen tubes, in tomatoes called an anthracone. I think it's not really a cone in a pepper, but it's similar. They carry the pollen. They're pollen tubes. Whatever you call it, it's the same process. You got to remove it. So you take these little pieces off that surround the little pointy thing, which is the female part. Let me see if I can get my camera in there. See the little thing on there? The little pollen tube. Now I'm gonna, like I said, you can twist it only so far, and you'll kind of get the habit if you start doing this of how much a plant can take. Some are more resilient than others. Again, let me check and make sure I'm in the picture here. Okay. Get the foliage out of the way. Now you see what you got there? See if I can get some of the background. Yeah, there we go, the light. Now all you have left is the little pointy piece. It's got a little bit of curvature in it, and that seems to be normal for peppers. Now what we're going to do is we're going to collect pollen to put on the very, very tip. Let's see if you can see the very tip there. And that very tip is sticky. Now we're going to collect the pollen, and the pollen is from the other plant you want to cross it with. In this case it's lipstick pollen, and you can see the flower there. Now you want to get a flower that is recently opened, and you definitely want to get the pollen before 2 p.m. because in the morning, I'd say between 8 and 11, after the humidity has kind of gone away, and on a warm day, the pollen is most viable. Once it's after like 2 in the afternoon or so, pollen starts to degrade some. It's still doable, but your best bet is to get the pollen from a newly opened flower before 2 o'clock. That's my suggestion anyway. From 8 to 11 probably is ideal. They will stay open for a long period of time after that. It's just not as viable. So let me get in here and I'm going to show you what I'm going to use. This is just a piece of dark plastic. I don't even know what it came off of, but anything that can hold pollen that drops onto it that's dark in nature, so you can see how much pollen you got and where it is so you can work with it. Some people use a sunglasses lens or a piece of dark plastic. A lot of times they make cheap sunglasses out of dark plastic, but basically any dark background. So let me see if I can get the focus back on the flower here. Now to pollinate it, I'm using this old toothbrush of mine. This is an older model Sonicare with a brush head that I cut back some, and you can tell by it it's been used many years with pollen. So what I do is I touch the back of the flower, the back of the head, not the female part or the male pollen tubes. I touch the back of the flower, and I'll put this underneath it and then vibrate it, and pollen should fall. If the humidity level is too high, or if it's too hot, which is seldom with peppers, or too cold, the pollen won't drop, and you may have to go to another pollen or do it another day. So we're going to use this as an example. Let me see if I can get it in here. And sometimes just by touching, as we're doing right now, it'll drop pollen. But when you use a toothbrush, I have to move the leaves out of the way, it does it even better. Let me see if I can show you what I'm talking about. Perfect. See that pollen right there? That's all we need. It doesn't take much. Alright, I've got my good pollen here, good fresh pollen. I've got the flower. Now this is very important because this is where I fail a bunch. I take the pollen and I have to barely touch the tip of this. If you push too hard, you'll break that little stem right off of there, and then you're all done with that flower and you got to start over. So you need to be very careful. So I'm going to bring this pollen, I gotta show it to you too, so I gotta do what I normally don't do, is force the two together. I normally move the pollen carrier up to the plant so that it can flex out of the way if it needs to. So I'm going to take it here, and all I'm going to do is bring them up very slowly. There. And just rub the tip just like that, and that's all it takes. That is it. Now, to make sure you get good fruit set, or in other words, that one begins to grow a little baby, you have to do the same thing with tomorrow. You take the little pollen carrier and you vibrate the toothbrush on the back of another flower. You get more pollen, you do it one more time, and then you put a string with it with a label on it if you're crossing more than one. If you know what you're crossing and you only have 2 plants, then obviously it's the 2 that you're using. But if you have a lot, it's really best to label them. And all I do is I take a piece of tomato twine and I put a little piece of masking tape around it, and I write on the masking tape, and in this case it would be CB times LP, so California brine times lipstick. This is what it looks like in a short period of time. Now it may take a few days before you get to this point where the flower starts to peel back and die off, and then the fruit begins to grow. But it will do it in most cases. So that's what it looks like there. Let me show you one a little further along. Right here is the next one. You can see the flower has kind of attached to the bottom of the pepper a little bit, and as the pepper has grown, it's pulled the petals down some, and you can even see the female part is still attached right here. A lot of times this is already dried off by this point with most peppers, and this comes off real easily, the flower petal. But this will eventually come off, and then from there it turns into this like we showed at the beginning of the video, and eventually it'll turn into this, and it'll even get redder than that. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous plant, this particular one. But your pepper might not do the same colors. Most peppers are green. They start off green, they're green all the way up until they turn red. One final bit of information here. I have lipstick, I have California Brian, and I have a pepper that's called, it's supposed to be Palmyra, but it's not. It doesn't look anything like the seed source picture I bought, so they sent me the wrong seed. But the point of this is that peppers come in a few different species, so you need to make sure a simple Google search of what peppers can cross-pollinate. If it's the same species, obviously it's going to cross-pollinate. And most peppers are one species. There's a couple other species, and even there's some minor amounts of crossing that can occur between two different species, but you get iffier with that. So most peppers are in the same species and you're not going to have this issue, but if you're going to do it, it's worth doing a little bit of research on the two you're wanting to cross, so that you don't get frustrated later on because you realize, hey, these two can't cross. It's not what I'm doing, it's just that it's not viable. So that's it. That's how you make a simple cross using two different types of peppers here as an example. This is Brent, you guys. We'll see you later.